You're listening to Big World Network.
Changing Wax, Episode 1. Written and read by Jared Kwan. If you were to walk outside right now and point towards the North Star, and then raise your finger a mere 2 millimeters above it, you would be pointing at the currently undiscovered solar system of Gray A. Smith. It has a name because it will eventually be discovered by Trevor R. Gray and Thomas D. Smith. The two men will be unable to agree on a name for the system, and due to a typo merging the names of the founders, it would be forever called Gray A. Smith. Of course, 2 millimeters does not seem like a great deal of distance, but when you have to travel nearly 762,522,005 light years, give or take half a light year depending on the Earth's rotation, then even a fraction of a millimeter can be the distance between landing an airplane at JFK International or somewhere in China. Though the math can be mistaken in light years, it would be hard to explain to passengers on a flight to JFK exactly why they were in China. As it is commonly known, the starlight we see today is millions of years old. But what is rarely thought about is that each glimmer of starlight has its own story to tell. Tragically, most stories are pretty bland, just gases or hot liquids stewing about. However, some offer the most brilliant insights into the universe. Others offer transcendence over good over evil, and some show how evil can devour whole worlds. The variety is as vast as all the cinema in the world, multiplied by a few billions would not be the first thing that would come to mind if you could sneak a peek at the Gray A. Smith. However, for the last 14,000 years of record, wax is what the inhabitants of the sixth planet have called their world. Glimpsing the starlight of wax, right now you would be witnessing the beginning of its 15th age. Someday we would have the technology to take the glimmer of starlight and download the history of whole civilizations to then watch like an interactive movie, as so many worlds have done before, and embarrassingly are doing so this very moment to our own world. As for wax, at the beginning of the 15th age, it was home to some 4 billion inhabitants, who resided on 4 main continents, and several hundred small islands. Roughly half the world was covered in darkness, and the other half in light. At the center of the largest and oldest continent, Mazri, sat the grandest city in the whole world. The magic in the world is dictated from the center of this city, the city of Ormlu. In the tallest spire in the world from the Book of Rules, called the Master Book of Magic. The presence of the book literally made Ormlu the heart of the divide between light and dark. The book started out as a few dozen pages of very simple rules to guide the use of magic, keeping the magic within the book from consuming everything and destroying the world. However, the book had one flaw. The authors failed to take into account that the magic was alive. Rule number 1. This book is to always be the most powerful book in the world and will be contained in the most powerful city in the world. This rule was left open to interpretation, and the magic would take liberties to ensure those facts remained true. As books of all sorts were compiled, the Master Book of Magic grew in size, in height, width, and depth. None had greater effect on the size of the book, like the Grand Master Herbalist Book of Flora and Fauna of the Southern Lands of Mazri, 2nd edition by Honest Thomas, which included press samples of everything listed. The book maintained its growth by breaking down rules, laws, and bylaws contained within it into the most drawn-out and generic terms possible. Occasionally, while no one was looking, the magic would create a few new bylaws, which were of far less consequence, if only to add to its pages. This often created unnecessary events or traditions. The city reacted in much the same way. As other cities grew larger, Ormlu grew in any dimension necessary to remain the most powerful. Rule number 2. The city will fairly represent the world's status, and no violence will be permitted within. This rule seemed to cover every facet conceived by the imagination, thanks to its 200 subclauses and 62 bylaws. Every night, the city would change, mostly along the middle. It would shift houses and buildings to represent whether the world was controlled by light or dark. On the positive side, the no violence rule was strictly enforced at every level. Swords could not be drawn, harmful spells could not be completed, punches would not land, arrows would not fly, and, well, you get the point. Depending on the severity of the offense, the city would warn you by teleporting you a few feet backwards, and if you attempted the same action 7 times, it would simply teleport you outside its borders of your respected side of choice. If you'd been teleported outside the city 7 times for separate infractions within 7 months period, the city would simply reject your entrance for a day, then for a week the second time, then a month for the third time, and so on. The city, though always changing, did have some constants as permitted in the book, such as the main spire of the city always being half shrouded in darkness and half in light, only ever changing in size and grandeur in order to remain the centerpiece of the most powerful city in the world. The main spire of Ormlu was called the Candlestick, for the most obvious reasons that it was always lit up and could be seen for a great distance in every direction. The tower reached its current height of 2,718 feet during the aggressive tower building phase of the Fifth Age. Needless to say, none of the other towers or spires in the city survived more than a couple years. The dark side towers suffered from poor craftsmanship, and the light side towers suffered from over craftsmanship. Amidst the rules, the book outlined on the light side of the city a building clearly labeled White Knight Tower would always remain as is, and in its place. Even if the world were completely dominated by the dark, it would still be light. On the exact opposite side of the city, a building marked the Pessimist Edifice would also remain as is, even if the world were dominated by the light. These 2 buildings were the homes of the official newspapers for each side, established to let the people know what was happening politically and the agenda of each ruler. As tradition would have it, there was always a ruler for both the light and the dark side. On the dark side, there was the Prince of Darkness, or Dark Lord. Appointment of the Dark Lord position was carefully thought out to place the most intimidating leader in power, and was mostly acquired with an assassination of the previous appointed leader. With the average odds of 20 to 1, the odds were not in favor of the challenger. On the light side, there was the king. This divine and holy appointment normally addressed by a great quest to find 3 relics, a sword, a shield, and a crown, which was undertaken by the heir to the last king upon their death. Wax was destined to always be at war, as was the nature of dark and light. Great battles would rage on both sides of the contested middle line. Occasionally, the light would charge bravely into the dark lands, and sometimes the dark forces would swarm out into the light. However, as irony would have it, the 2 sides would also always be in eternal negotiations and trade. In the center of Candlestick, about halfway to the top, was the Great Hall, where the Dark Prince and the Lightside King would meet on an annual basis to review their trade agreements and negotiate minor and insignificant details. The Dark Lord at this time was Gordon B. Twiller, and actually, Dark Lord Twiller had been in power longer than any recorded Dark Lord in history, having ruled for 200 years, thanks to a bit of magic. The ruler of the light side was King Timothy K. Ragman, the 17th, from the longest ruling family thus far of the light. In preparation for the annual meeting of rulers, special monks would study the Master Book of Magic and memorize it end to end. This would place them in a unique position to advise the two delegations as to both the formalities and where their ideas fell within the rules, laws, and bylaws. This also conveniently helped prevent anyone from spontaneously combusting in the middle of a negotiation. There were always 3 appointed monks to each delegation and a head monk to sit at the table as arbitrator. With the well-established tradition of power, the largest armies in history, and the most magic manipulation Wax had ever seen, no one would suspect that a misfortunate monk, an unusual imp, and a teenager would be the ones to change everything. As fate would have it, our story begins with the Master Book of Magic, Chapter 17, Section 8, Subparagraph 12, 4th sentence. Gray hair topped the mostly bald head of the 90-year-old monk. He barely made the 5-foot 3-inch minimum requirement to use the various tools needed to read from the Master Book of Magic. His deep blue eyes strained to read the words through the large magnifying glass. He had only recently been given the responsibilities of the head monk, as the previous one had decided to up and die at the age of 127. Head monk Taufrin tried to calculate the various mathematical variables necessary to see if one of the most obscure bylaws would apply to the annual review that was due to start in only 10 hours. "How could we have missed this?" he whispered to himself. His face was clearly filled with distraught over his most recent discovery. He quickly looked over the room to see which other monks were present. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see his most favored friend, the Honorable Monk Musashi Gray. With clear distinction, Taufrin cleared his throat loud enough to get the attention of everyone in the room. He quickly beckoned for Musashi to join him. "Yes, sir? What can I do for you?" Musashi asked. In fact, the 2 men looked so very similar, one might mistaken them for twins. "Are you familiar with Chapter 17, Section 8, Subparagraph 12, 4th sentence?" Tao promptly asked in embarrassment. "Oh, yes, the Review of Death bylaw," Musashi replied with a confused look. "Why?" "Out of curiosity, would not this annual event qualify for this particular bylaw to be enacted?" Tao said with a bit of hesitation. "Let me see. Upon said year of which the Dark Lord Empire shall pass the qualifying requirement of years as stated previous equals, and said Light King's family reign qualifying in years to Sir Septum per equivocation, then the right of review of death shall be provided at the annual review on the year of even equality between the two, by the designated witch of Ormlu. Subnote A-1. Please refer to reference sheet 2A for calculation, or at least I think that's how it goes." Musashi recanted while waving his fingers in the air as if reading it from the very page. "I do believe this is a qualifying year, sir." "I was afraid of that. How could this have been overlooked? We were so careful to prepare everything exactly and to precise directions, Tao said, now intently staring at the ceiling. I don't think we even have a witch designated for Ormlu anymore. Might I mention that on page 272, third paragraph, it states that if no witch is currently designated as the official witch of Ormlu, then one can be temporarily appointed by a high public official? Musashi said in response. I think of you as a high public official. Yes, exactly, Tao said in the high pitch of excitement. I shall assign monk Gorth to beckon the nearest witch as soon as possible to my presence. Are you sure Gorth is up to this? Musashi asked with deep concern. I only ask because he has had difficulties in the past accomplishing his tasks. Head Monk Tao was painfully aware of the past Gorth carried with him, and, in fact, he was counting on it. He was far more worried about one of his more competent monks being killed, or worse, being turned into some odd creature or slime for demanding something of a witch. There were not many witches in the city, as they could not use any of their abilities, especially for devious acts. This meant whoever took on the task would have to leave the safety of the city and wander into the dark lands. Tao had made up his mind to send Gorth. Here, sir? You have need of me? Gorth answered at his name being called out. Yes, I have a very important task for you to undertake. One of the utmost importance, Tao said with a solemn face. I am ready, sir. What is my task? Gorth replied in eagerness. Go into the dark side and bring a witch here within an hour from now, Tao urgently instructed. Yes, sir. Right away, sir, Gorth replied. And what should I tell the witch as to why we require her presence? I must speak with her immediately for an important job, Tao answered, holding out a piece of parchment. After a moment of thought, he added, Also, take 6 of the underclassmen and 2 guards from the practice area to go with you. Very well, sir, Gorth said, snatching the parchment away from Tao. With little notice, he ran off through the chamber towards the stairs. It was a good thing for Gorth that the parchment was magical, and that the directions of his task had already scribed themselves into the paper. Might I ask, why so many resources? Musashi asked when Gorth was clearly out of earshot. I've barely given him anything, and with reason, Tao answered. With Gorth distracting the dark side, I want you to go and get a witch. Take 2 of our best guards, and any other resources you need. We must have a witch as soon as possible. Musashi replied with a slight bow. It is my honor, sir.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.